I spent almost every waking minute with Sachin. The entire World Cup, he never faced a single bowler. I was the only person who threw balls to him for the entire World Cup.
So working with Sourav Ganguly, John Wright, Rahul Dravid, Sehwag, all of these guys, I couldn't add any value in terms of how to play the game or what we should do in terms of strategy.
When Dhoni was the wicketkeeper, no other wicketkeeper was looked at for a decade. Why? Because that position was taken.
When the pitches supported the bowlers. So I really think it's unfair that he gets criticized. A Sourav Ganguly at his peak in these conditions here would be a completely different player. He would dominate the game in a completely different way, Right. And I say this knowing and seeing a lot of cricket, but also understanding how technology's changed and how pitches are changed. That's why I say that.
Generally, they bring that something special to it. And it's that player who lights it up when Shubham Gill did it, or Jaiswal did it, or KL Rahul did it for Kings 11. Then that team's having a really special IPL that year.
Guys, welcome to an all-new episode of Infinite Health with Shayamal Vallabhjee. He's a sports and performance psychologist, and he's worked with legends like Virat Kohli, Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, and Sourav Ganguly. He's also working currently for the Indian football team. He's also worked for Kings 11 Punjab, and he's also worked for tennis teams. I think you will learn a lot about how to build a champion mindset from this podcast. Yeah, hi Shamal. Thank you so much for coming to Infinite Health online podcast. This is my first time I'm doing this, so I'm extremely excited to have you because once I went over your credentials and the things you've done, it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Thank you so much, Anant. Very excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
So honestly, Shamal, like a lot of our audiences are young parents, to be honest, like one of my largest audiences between 25 to 40. And something that I really wanted to understand and discuss with you is that, how can, like at one spectrum, children develop a champion mindset? And on the other hand, how adults like me, who've probably not played sports in my life and who's probably been very fat in my entire life, who got into fitness just a few years back, also develop that mindset. But just to start with, Shamal, you've had an incredible career. You worked with top athletes, including the 2003 World Cup Indian cricket team, international athletes, Kings 11 Punjab. Like, I just wanted to start by asking you about your journey. Like, how did you become interested in sports and performance psychology overall?
Yeah, thanks, Anant. It's we're going back some time, but I think my journey is not very different from any young boy growing up, and many girls as well, where you see sport and you aspire to be a sportsman or to play a particular sport at the highest level or international level. Growing up as a young kid, you're watching sport on TV, so all those people are your heroes, and you have that deep admiration to become one of those or to actually share an arena with them. And that's exactly where I started. I grew up in South Africa, but unfortunately I grew up in an apartheid era, so there was no opportunity for people of color. So I was playing cricket and I was decently good. I played in various academy and state teams. I went on to play South African universities, SAM 19. But when I turned pro, we had something called a quota system where there's only one person of color that could get into a system. So as a result, it didn't take long for anyone to know whether you were going to get an opportunity or not. You literally just looked around you, and if you were not the best amongst your peers, then you literally were never going to get a chance. And that was a harsh reality. So I immediately at 18 started to specialize and study sports and exercise science. I was very, very fascinated with the human body, and I was always looking at how can I get a performance advantage. That was the mindset that I came from. I think the one big advantage that I had over many people studying today is that because I played sport in a system, I was also a bursary recipient from that same system to study. So the cricket federations empaneled me into universities. I studied, I did research, I did numerous courses. And at the same time, I got the opportunity to integrate that into a professional team. So I've been coaching and working with professional teams from the time I'm 18 years old, right in the heart of it. My very, very first team that I worked with had the likes of Sean Pollock, John T. Rhodes, Malcolm Marshall just transitioned. We had West Indians like Nixon McLean and Eldine Baptiste. And I was playing club cricket with them. I was practicing, I was coaching them. So that was the psychology that I came from. And the South African culture is a very, very hard culture. The one thing that not too many people know is that in South Africa, the school systems produce talent. But we have this very, very beautiful underlying philosophy, which means that if you play a sport, irrespective of what sport you play, cricket, football, rugby, whatever it is, you have to earn the right to touch the ball, okay, which doesn't exist in India. And that was the biggest thing that I had to start to bring into the country when I started working here in 2007. So what do I mean by earn the right to touch the ball? That means that you have to have a body that's physically fit, that's injury free. You have to do all the hard yards in the gym. You have to be at peak physical form before you even get the opportunity to touch the ball. Touching the ball, playing with the ball, working with the ball is a privilege that must be earned. When I came to India, one of the things that I struggled with, and as a country we struggled with, was that people loved the sport so much that the fitness and the well-being took second seat. And as a result, whenever on a competitive stage, we found ourselves lacking on that front. Now, I'd say about a decade and a half later, that's slowly starting to transition. But really, what's important to understand here is how the culture of a country determines the philosophy of the country that creates the mindset of those people. Now, your question, where we started off and understanding my journey, was about mindset. And really and truly, I came from that mindset where you have to do the work to earn the opportunity. So the work ethic was second to none. And that was literally where I started. And the journey really spun on from there. I had first mover advantage, where I was in a class, my first class that I took was 27 people. I think out of 27 people in my first batch, I would go on to say about 2 people are still working in professional sports today. Everyone else transitions into other things. There were very, very few opportunities, but because I had first mover advantage and I had professional experience, the doors kind of opened for me. And that was where everything sort of began. And it's just catapulted in the right direction. I have to tell everyone listening that I did not engineer anything in my life. I just looked for opportunities and took those opportunities, and wherever that path carved me, I went into that. Sometimes I found myself in sports where I didn't know too much and I had to force myself to learn and study those sports. Sometimes I had to take a step out of places that were my strengths so that I could redefine who I was and really understand what's working. And I was always looking for that competitive advantage. And my competitive advantage came through the integration of technology in professional sports. I was really one of the first movers understanding wearable technology and learning how to integrate it into performance in real time to make decisions on how we should move a game and structure a game. Because right at in early 2000, when I was working with cricket teams, and matches were won or lost by 1 run. And in a season where you're playing about 20 to 25 games, inadvertently 2 to 3 games get won or lost by 1 run. And those 1 runs determine whether you make it to the knockout stage or you don't. So the first thing I really understood is that if 3 games are won and lost by 1 run, and I can bring a piece of technology in that could shift one of those results in my favor, then I'm going to get to the knockout stage. And if I get to the knockout stage, then it's anybody's game on that day. But the first challenge is to get to a position where all of the factors that you're prepared to come into play. And that's what I started doing, and integrating video and heart rate. And it's been a beautiful journey, and we'll cover a lot of it as we chat.
But that's brilliant. I mean, just converting the kind of challenges you faced. I mean, right from starting out where there was a quota system, I was very surprised, because usually, we hear so much about a quota system in India, that like a quota system in South Africa, where you actually accepted a challenge, and that led to with who you are. And like learning a new sport suddenly in life is also very different, because sometimes we get so physically inclined to play one sport that just to learn so many things together, I think that's absolutely brilliant. But I just wanted to understand, you've played with and you worked with so many legends like, Sachin Tendulkar, Sourav Ganguly in the 2003 in World Cup lineup. Like, if you just had to point out in general, like, what are the basic insights that you gained working from them? Like, what did you see? Like, what was the difference that you saw in their approach towards performance than, say, a regular athlete in general?
This is a very, very fascinating question. And for everyone listening, you must know that when you're working with a professional athlete, very often they are technically more proficient than you. And there's a good chance that they come with more experience than you do in that sport. So if you are a physio or a doctor, even the coach has more experience because he's played the game at a significant time. But if you're on the support staff that's supporting that team and you need to win their credibility, you have to bring something to the table that is adding value to them over and above their experience or their technical proficiency. So working with Sourav Ganguly, Sachin, John Wright, Rahul Dravid, Sehwag, all of these guys, I couldn't add any value in terms of how to play the game or what we should do in terms of strategy. These were the best thinkers in the game. And remember, the 2003 World Cup was full of legends. You had, I think, Australians had Ricky Ponting and Steve Smith, and all of these guys were there, and it was really like a cauldron of talent that was really flourishing. So I realized that what was the value that I could add? Okay. And I had to add a value that they valued, but they could not, it wasn't equal in terms of what they brought to the table. So the value that I had was technology. I understood technology better than anyone else. The second thing is I understood certain conditions, pitch conditions, better than anyone else in our Indian squad at that time. In the entire squad, I was the only South African in that squad of we had more than 30 people in them. Okay, but no one knew the pitches and the conditions in South Africa better than me. I knew which ground would respond to batting first, bowling first, which ground would dry up, where the wind came from, which bowler should bowl from which end. I understood that. And that was information that was completely invaluable to our entire journey and the way we moved. And obviously, I didn't make those decisions, but I presented the information to the decision makers, right? But I gave them perspective on why these things are important. Right. So what happens when you're working with people like this is you have to find a way in which you can present a piece of information that's absolutely significant to the outcome of that match. That's what you have to do. And the one way to know it is you have to, and I say this to everybody who works in sport, I said, you cannot be a generalist across all sports. Up to today, I specialize in only a few sports that I work with. And the reason I specialize in them is the first thing is you have to know every single rule in the rule book. Okay. The reason why you have to know every rule, you're not a player, neither you're a coach, but your advantage is going to come from knowing the rule and then knowing how to break the rule. So the first advantage comes from knowing how to break the rule, but you will never know that if you don't know the rule. So the first thing I'll tell everyone is know every single rule in the rule book. Your first advantage will come from that. The second is you have to get insight from all of the role players in the ecosystem. Now, if we use cricket as an example, I had a habit, a very, very beautiful habit that was taught to me by my mentor, Phil Russell, when I was 18 years old. He says, when we go to the ground, and I traveled with many professional teams, the first person I speak to in any ground is the groundsman. Okay. And if I can't get to the groundsman, then I get to the people who are preparing the pitch. I'm asking questions like, okay, what was the weight of the roller that you rode? Okay. When was the last time that you rode? And I explain why I do this. I said, did it rain in the past couple of days coming here? What's the type of grass that you're using? Now, all of this is informing me about certain things. For example, if it rained 24 to 48 hours before we're going to play our game and they used a heavy roller, the water's going to come to the top. Okay, the water's going to come to the top and it's a really hot day. There's a good chance it will move in the beginning, but it'll break up in the afternoon. So if we choose to bowl second, the spinners are going to be critically important. Okay, when did they roll it last? It's going to let me know about the firmness of it. When did they start preparing this pitch? So once you start to understand that, then the groundsman also tell you what is the probability of of the conditions changing. So they'll tell you if the wind is coming from a northeasterly direction, it's going to rain. If the wind is coming from a southeasterly, it's going to be hot the entire day, and stuff like that. So, they'll tell you, hey, this pitch generally both turns on this side, doesn't it? So as you start to speak to people in the ecosystem, you get information that's so critical and so valuable. That's where you can plug your advantage in to a sports team. And this is the thing that no one takes care of. Most people don't even know who the groundsmen in most grounds are. Okay, they have no idea what's happening. But once you start to get to understand all of these variables in external conditions, then it gives you a significant advantage. And we can do the same in golf, for example. You can do the same in football. When did they water the pitch? How thick is the grass? Are we going to leave it in there? For example, in football, if you're playing a team that's significantly better than you and the strategy that they're playing is much faster, their ball contact time is between 2 to 3 tenths of a second per touch, you're going to struggle to compete with the team if you're not as fast. So what we try to do is we try to encourage them to not cut the grass too low, because the grass is low, the ball moves faster, or we'll ask them, hey, listen, when did you water it? Can you not water it as much? Because why? Water makes the ball slide. If the grass is dry, it holds up. So once you understand conditions, you can understand how conditions play and can give you a significant advantage. It's not just about the technical proficiency of the player and the strategy of the coach. There's a million things that you cannot see, and it's the unseen things that give you the biggest advantage.
That's a brilliant point, because it's like I'm just thinking out loud. Like if I was a player, I'm concentrating on my performance, but you're actually getting the technology and data and the entire ecosystem around them to just like sync with them to make it into a perfect performance strategy at that point of time.
Absolutely. Data is only as valuable as its application. If you know exactly what it's inferring and how to use it, then data is useless. If you don't know what to do with data, data is a distraction. Then you might as well just focus on the basics. And I remember I worked with a few teams where I had all of the technical proficiency and the tools to capture all of the data, but the players were not of the mindset to use that data, to adopt that data, to even listen to it. And we got to a stage where we shoved it all aside and we said, okay, let's just focus on the basics. And the basics is, what can we do best and how can we make sure that we execute with a level of proficiency? Very, very simple. So Boris Becker told me this when I was traveling with Mahesh and Sanya on the ATP tour. He says, Shayamal, coaching is 50% is about knowing what to say. The other 50% is about knowing when to say it. And this was a golden piece of advice for any coach or anyone listening.
Very well said. But I have to ask you about Sourav Ganguly. So I'm from Calcutta, and Sourav Ganguly is like literally considered the god of cricket. I have to ask you, there was a whole phase with Sourav Ganguly where he was really criticized because he was getting out early and he wasn't playing that well. But in general, he was always considered like a master strategizer. Since you've closely seen him and worked with him, what are your thoughts on Sourav Ganguly as from a psychological perspective?
You're 100% right. He was a master strategist. You're 100% right that he got into a lot of flack and he came under a lot of heat for the way he got out. They said that he's weak against the bouncer. People exploited him. The few things that stacked up. Firstly is that, the people who criticized the technique were not evaluating his strength. His strength was in his leadership. Right. And even though he had a weakness against particular areas in his game, he was proficient enough to ensure it never got him out all the time. The second thing was that the weakness was exploited because Sourav played in an area where the pitches had more grass than we'll ever see today. And he played in an era where they produced some of the greatest fast bowlers. Pure fast bowlers. He played against the Imran Khans, the Walker Yunuses, the Mackay Tinis, the Brett Lees, all of these guys were in there. West Indies were bringing Curtly Ambrose, Courtney Walsh was running in at him. These are the greatest fast bowlers the game has ever seen, and he played in an era like that. Okay, right. When the pitches supported the bowlers. So I really think it's unfair that he gets criticized. A Sourav Ganguly at his peak in these conditions here would be a complete completely different player. He would dominate the game in a completely different way,
Right.
and I say this knowing and seeing a lot of cricket, but also understanding how technology's changed and how pitches are changed. That's why I say that. But having worked with him, I can tell you that, he was one of the best leaders I have seen. And also, Mike Braley, he published a book called The Art of Captaincy. He was an England captain, and he was known for his captaincy. He was a phenomenal leader. And sometimes we have to understand that the leader's job is to win the trust of the people and not necessarily be the best performer. And this is where the world has skewed everything in the wrong way. We think that the captain needs to be the best performer. Actually, that's not true. The captain needs to lead the best performers, right? And because we've got the metrics skewed, we judge people incorrectly. So
Right.
Sourav was an exceptional captain because he won the trust of the people, the youngsters, and he also empowered them. Every single youngster in that squad were really good friends with him. They could walk up to him, they could chat, they could do everything. The second thing he did, though, even though he was a captain, what the media sees were the press conferences he did. But really and truly, behind the scenes, he spoke very, very little. Very, very little. He actually empowered everyone else to speak. In fact, Sourav would pass the mic to a Sachin Tendulkar. He'll ask Sourav. And then every single meeting without fail, every single meeting during the 2003 World Cup, you had Yuvraj Singh, you had Harbhajan, you had Zair Khan, you had sometimes even Dinesh Mongia. These were the people speaking. Ashish Nehra, they were speaking. He would never let a meeting end without them speaking. Anil Kumble, Rahul Dravid, they were there. He asked them for their opinions, but he made an effort to make sure that the youngsters spoke, and that's how he created belonging. That team did exceptionally well because the youngsters felt as integrated in the strategy and the execution of every game plan as the seniors did. And that was one of the best things I have seen. And it's a lesson I hold up to today.
No, absolutely. I mean, these are such amazing lessons to learn in any field in general. I feel not just in business, not just in sports, but I think in business and every other field as well. But I really want to bring up this conversation about children, because there are so many parents nowadays, and we live in such a pampered world. Like everyone is pampering their children, and there is this anxiety and trauma and different kinds of parenting that different parents adopt. But if someone really wants to bring up their child as a sports person growing up, or want to put them in sports, I mean, I just want to understand at the very base, how do you build that kind of environment around the child to sort of, start developing into a champion mindset overall?
So the first thing to building a champion is actually the ecosystem. From all of the champions that I've studied, the thing that makes a champion is not the proficiency of how they execute a skill, right? It's about all the nuances of the sport that they grab. So what needs to start happening is you have to build an ecosystem around that sport. So if the person's playing cricket, for example, or wants to be a cricketer, you have to be watching all the cricket. You have to have conversations around it. You have to start to engage and listen to different conversations with experts. Why? Because that's where the pros get a significant advantage, was that from very, very early on, they were in an ecosystem where they may have practiced the same time as everyone else, but for every other hour in the day, there was some element of conversation around that was molding their psyche about the nuances of performance that goes into it. You're never going to make a champion out of 2 hours of practice 5 days a week, right? And the 2 hours of practice cannot become 10 hours a day for 5 days a week because the body won't sustain it. So how do you build that mindset and psychology is by the nuanced conversations that happen in their ecosystem. Are you taking them to watch other games? Are you taking them to listen to other pros? Are you taking them and trying to have conversations with different people? Are you creating an ecosystem where the conversation is as healthy as the competition itself? This is how you develop a champion. And the second thing parents need to do is you need to distinguish who is the coach and who is the parent. And if the parent becomes the coach, then that's an absolute disaster. And parents can become coaches, but then they relinquish the right to parent. You can't play both roles. You can't switch because the mind of a child is very fragile, and the mind of a child cannot compartmentalize the advice from the coach and the advice from the parent if it's coming from the same person. So it's very, very critical that you pick your role and you stick to your role, and you have to stick to that role under all circumstances. So these are the things that you will see, and these are the things that really and truly make the difference in how you cultivate the mindset of a champion.
Your last point just made me remember that movie King Richard, in which the Serena Williams father, he was his coach, and like the whole story goes in the same way, like because it's so
You have
difficult
to.
for children to compartmentalize. That's a brilliant observation, actually. But what about joy? Like I'm just saying that as a child, like sometimes when we watch movies, we see that parents are trying to make them tough, or like just make them do something again and again and again. And while that's great for movies, I want to understand, like, you've played with athletes all around the world, and you've been with them and you've seen the psyche. Like, is there an element of great joy that's brought into the sport? Because, sometimes if you're doing something for a long time, you might lose the joy out of it. So how do you inculcate that?
Yeah, I come from a performance world, quite honestly, and the challenge with performance sport is that the age to turn professional is becoming younger and younger, right?
Right.
So, now there's a lot of research and theory around whether we should super specialize early or stay generalists for a longer period of time
Mm.
and stuff like that. But remember, to become a professional in anything, to achieve a level of mastery in anything, not just in sport, in any field, you're going to have to put in a significant amount of hours. Not all of those hours are going to be comfortable. Not all of those times are going to be easy. There are going to be times when you're going to have to make certain sacrifices around places you want to be, things you want to do to get those hours in to achieve mastery. So, yes, in the beginning, you want to ensure enjoyment and fun. But there comes a stage where you decide that, hey, I'm good enough and I want to take this serious enough. And then I'm not saying joy falls off the table, but discipline needs to take over. And there's a
Right.
beautiful saying in sport. They'll say, motivation doesn't always exist. And when motivation is devoid, your discipline must take over. Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
discipline must be cultivated through that. So I'm not encouraging people to completely leave joy out of it, right? I know all of my athletes find it extremely tough, but they enjoy it. They love it. They love the pain. They love the ability to redefine themselves. The question is, what does that success mean to you? Is your passion to become the best cricketer in the world, or is your passion to make the most money out of that sport, or is your passion to just redefine who you are through that lens of that sport?
Right.
Very, 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 very important to do that. And you remember, the conversation becomes very skewed when you look at things through the lens of cricket in a country like India. Okay,
Mm.
when you start to look at a sport like Neeraj Chopra, for example, in javelin, right? His life and his training is very different from a Rohit Sharma, because Rohit Sharma would never be short of spotlights, cameras, money, and this thing. A Neeraj or anyone else you're looking at they would get that once in 4 years,
Right.
right? When the Olympic comes around. So when you frame this through the lens of the sport, the metrics are completely different in there. So, but what's really important is you must understand that the only way you can sustain that journey is if you are enjoying it. But the enjoyment is not externally driven, it's
Mm.
internal.
Right.
That internal joy has to always be there. That's why you're in it. And if you're doing it for someone else, you'll never be able to sustain it.
No, that's a brilliant point. But like you spoke about discipline, and that I feel like there's this really famous quote that freedom is on the other side of discipline. I really believe that, and I think you just hit the nail on the spot, because my next question is on that, which is basically like, how is psychology and physiology interdependent on each other? Because can you handle more stress if you're physiologically more disciplined and physiologically have, say, less body fat or stronger? You think that you can outperform someone?
So discipline is a skill like anything else, and it's a skill that's vertical, so it goes deeper. So that means that if I practice the skill of meditation every single day and I become disciplined, I wake up at 5 a.m., I meditate for an hour every single day, 1, 2, 3, a decade later, 2 decades later, I've got this discipline, right? Is the discipline that I've cultivated in meditation directly transferable to, let's assume I want to become a gymmer, and some part of it will transfer, a large part of it won't transfer. So discipline is built directly proportional to the skill in which you can practice it. That's called transference. It's a psychological principle that we use, especially in sport, to understand all of that. Now, when you look at physiology and psychology, it depends on what the skill you're trying to do is. So, for example, if you want to practice discipline in a thing that requires physical proficiency, then yes, the body does matter, right? But mental toughness and discipline is a cognitive function. It's the ability to repeat that process over and over and over without getting distracted. But we use the body to teach ourselves discipline. We use physiology to cultivate the psychology as such, So they can be independent, but they are also very, very dependent on each other. And, I used to tell people that discipline is when you stick to a process long enough for it to break you before it makes you, which means that, and I tell people, I don't believe in challenges that are like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, and I learned this lesson because I spent almost 4 years living in a monastery as a monk, and you got to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, get ready, start your meditation at 4 to 6. And initially I thought it was a week and 2 weeks, and then a couple months went by, and then I didn't have any foresight of leaving. And the thing is that when you don't know when a process is going to end, but you repeat it every day, it makes you much stronger than when you know when this process is going to end. So why is it that most people who lose weight put the weight back on? Because they have a target. So they're doing a certain thing till they hit a particular target. After they hit the target, all barriers fall away. But discipline is the ability to repeat a process independent of any constraint or any barriers. You just repeat, you just repeat, you just repeat. On days when you don't want to, you do it. On days when you feel easier, you do it. So discipline is when you repeat a process so much that even on the most difficult days you do it, it breaks you before you realize how important that is, and it sort of makes you.
I think that's such an important point. But do you also feel like visualization is also a very important aspect of it? Like, since you mentioned that you were a monk, and was visualization an important aspect of discipline as well? Because sometimes just to achieve something, does it become at some level an important thing?
Visualization it's an interesting concept we use a lot in performance. It can be used to enhance the execution in the discipline routine of whatever you're practicing. But to cultivate discipline, to show up, in my opinion, it's not so much visualization, it's more the ecosystem. If the ecosystem supports you, you will cultivate discipline. I keep saying this. The only reason I was able to wake up every single day at 3 a.m. when I was in the temple was because I was sleeping in the room with 15 other boys who were all waking up. If you're in an environment where everyone's doing it, you will do it. If I remove you out of the environment, it becomes significantly more difficult to do that. You must understand your greatest strength and your greatest threat are both between your ears. It's in your mind, and you have to lean very hard on the ecosystem to be able to circumnavigate, because that voice can become very, very loud.
But then how do you handle the stress and burnout then? Because I think this is something that I think all of us go through at some point in our life, especially with athletes, the younger ones, what if they want to give up the sport? How do you feel what kind of, apart from besides discipline, what do you think young athletes need to do to sort of manage that, slump in performance or that burnout or that stress? How would you suggest they get out of it?
You will get burnt out if you're doing it for a particular result, because the results are not always in your favor. Then you'll get burnt out. If you're doing something because if you're saying, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to cash out on $10-20 million in 3 years, by year 4, you're going to get burnt out. Why? Because It was linked to an external. But if you said, I want to be an entrepreneur because that's who I am, and my inner thing is to create and to build and to scale, you'll be there 20 years later, still doing that, and the money will take care of itself. So burnout is when you put the outcome above the process. When you put the process above the outcome, you won't get burnt out.
Right.
So most people who succeed put the process over the outcome. So with kids, what you got to do is you got to cultivate a love for the process, and you got to have conversations around the process. If you start to have more conversations around the outcome, around this championship is coming, or this tournament, or you got to win this medal, or you got to get this position, they will inadvertently get burnt out. But if you start to look and talk about process, okay, what are you learning? How can we get better? What was the one thing you tweaked, and how did that feel? If everything's about process and we're dialing back into process all the time, outcomes will take care of themselves, And remember, in psychology, we say burnout is more linked to who you spend time with than what you're actually doing, which is burnout is more linked to ecosystem than to process. So when we look at this, if you're in an ecosystem where everyone, the parents, the kids, everyone are talking about results and championships, the kids are not going to want to do that. And I had a few swimmers, for example. I was working about a couple of years ago. I was working with a group of young swimmers that used to swim at one of the clubs in Mumbai, and that was all the conversation was about. Oh, this championship, this swimmer, this person is the fastest, that person's the fastest. We got to get into the nationals. This person's a national swimmer. I walked into the club. The head coach there would treat people in accordance with who he thinks would win a championship. It was the most toxic environment. And then I wasn't surprised when parents come and say, my kid doesn't want to swim anymore, And the reason it wouldn't surprise me, because you've taken all the joy out of it, and they are not growing or they're not evolving through that process. All we're doing is satisfying this need for someone's title and someone's medals. Now, if we reframe everything through the lens of process, where we're doing this because we want to become better, we're doing this because this is something that I truly love, burnout falls by the wayside.
I think this just really brings me to this article I was reading like a few days back, like while I was researching on this topic, is that, and it really hit me hard because it said that a lot of pro athletes, when they retire, they get really depressed because, I just want to bring in the whole topic of purpose, because what you said really aligns with this. Because like, what is the purpose beyond sport? Like, because when you're playing a sport, I mean, most of the sports have a retirement age. Say it could be around 38, 40 for cricket. It could be 45 for tennis, or some people defying the odds, like maybe slightly higher for golf. But like most of the sports that we play have a certain retirement age. And when people are specifically playing at a pro athlete level, like once they retire, like it was a report which said that so many people get depressed because they don't know what to do. Like I was watching an interview from by Michael Phelps, and he said that I have 18 Olympic gold medals, and the kind of depression that I went through for 2 to 3 years, I just didn't know what to do with myself after after the last Olympics. So like, how do you feel like athletes should be trained mentally in terms of building their mindset towards a career beyond sports, like towards their life in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, I wouldn't say part and parcel. It's a very harsh reality of what happens to many athletes. Just recently, now a month ago, the Paralympics finished a few days ago. A month ago, we had the Olympics finish. We had about 15,000 athletes who went there. I can tell you right now, maybe a couple of hundred won medals. A large chunk of those people would be going through the depression that we are talking about right now, because that was their moment, that was their spotlight, and right now they've completely fallen away. If they weren't one of those few who won a medal, it's completely zero. It comes down to scratch. You got to go and repeat the process over and over again. So that is a harsh reality of what everyone's doing. I think what's becoming more important and more prevalent is that the ecosystem that supports an athlete is not just the performance ecosystem around how they compete. It's not the team manager, the physio, the doctor, the coach. The ecosystem needs to be far wider. It's about the people who are advising them about their education, about their financial stability, about how to make investments that draw on their energy. If you look at Carl Carl Lewis, for example, and what he's talking about. You look at Michael Phelps, what they're talking. But you look at the guys who are really smart, who are still enjoying their life and doing everything. You look at Steph Curry, who's still performing. You look at Michael Jordan. They've diversified their investments where their passion is still for the sport has been integrated and woven into many other things, right? And that was because it was a byproduct of good advice that came in there. So I think the best way to circumnavigate this is that a large part of an athlete's education should be on how to diversify their investments that keep their interest in sports and in sport itself generally into different verticals. Either it could be to tech-based startups, it could be in products, it could be maybe working with another sports team, but you have to diversify your interests. If you don't, you're going to find yourself siloed out the day you retire, and you're going to be sitting and waiting for the phone to ring. So this is one of the ways in which we can advise athletes to overcome or to hopefully circumnavigate this depression that we're talking about.
Because I saw one of your interviews in which you were talking about some learnings from the Bhagavad Gita, and it just really struck me like I mean, do you really use the teachings of Bhagavad Gita when you're working with these athletes and like the way they perform?
All the time, and the teaching that you're referring to, and the one that I refer to, is the use of ego, where I was telling everyone, for example, that it's not all about you. We can work hard, we can try, we can do every single thing, but inadvertently there is a piece of there's something that happens in the ecosystem that moves things in their favor.
Right.
And I said, if you're unable to recognize that invisible energy in there, then you're going to think you're the front and center of everything. And if you think you're the front and center of everything, then you're going to put all that pressure on you, and you're going to mount that pressure on yourself, because results won't go in the same direction. So, very interesting. Like, I was reading the Netflix autobiography, and one of the, I don't know if you saw the documentary called Icarus by Brian Fogel. Brian Fogel is a friend, and I was reading on Netflix, they took a punt on that. When the documentary came and they were about to buy it, the price for it was 2.5 million, and a lot of other guys were bidding for it, and they decided to take a punt on it. They believed this was the one, and they spent 4 million to buy that documentary and put it on Netflix. And it didn't do well at all. Absolutely didn't do well. They tried everything and it didn't do well. And a couple of months later, Russia got banned from the Olympic Games. And in the case where they were banning Russia, Icarus was described in the references as one of the references that was cited in the case as to why they were banning Russia. And then all of a sudden it blew up. And then the Netflix guys go on and say, we made yes, we made the right decision. Yes, we made the right decision. It was the one. And I'm saying, there's no way you were going to know Russia was going to be banned. Yes, it was a good piece of thing. You ticked the hard work, you ticked the research, you ticked the competency. But how are you unable to give credit to the fact that something completely beyond your variable shifted everything in your favor? That is ego. The inability to see that, and the ability to see, hey, yes, we took a bet. It could have gone either way, but something beyond our control moved it in our favor that completely changed the course of this movie and the course of us as a company. That is really being humble and starting to train the brain to look for things beyond your control. Once the brain sees what the eye cannot, then advantage starts to open up.
That's such a brilliant point, because I was just coming up to distractions, because I was actually reading an article today. I don't know if this is true or not, or I'm just being stupid. But they said that, like, in these Olympic Games, like after they've played their sport, like there's, I mean, you can't, of course, police these, people. But is there a lot of diversions, whether it's sex or whether it's drugs or whether it's other forms of recreation when they just burn out? Like, do you think there can be some form of policing done for sports people like that, or like how does that work?
I mean, they athletes are policed enough already, isn't it? They're policed around. We have a doping test in competition, out of competition. They have frameworks. We are told what time to arrive. We are given, you can go to work anytime. We have businesses like WeWork that are 24 hours. If Anand feels like working at 3 a.m., you can go there. If Neeraj Chopra wants to throw a javelin or Rohit Sharma wants to practice, he has to book a 1 hour slot at MCA, go to this thing. So we already policed a lot. Why would you want to put more constraints? In fact, I think if businesses had the constraints athletes had to deal with, unicorns would be very, very few and far between. Not that they are in abundance now, but we have more than 112 unicorns in India, which is a significant number, and we have much fewer Olympians who won medals if you equate those two. So why? It's because there's no constraints around those business side, and there's so much constraints around the Olympic and athletic side as such. So I wouldn't be a fan of policing anymore. I'm also a belief that sport cultivates in you certain values and certain morals. We coach you to be the best person you possibly can be. We're coaching the human, not the athlete. I always say that. We see your potential, we're guiding it towards greatness, but we're coaching the human. Now, if I have to put constraints in for everything else, then I'm not recognizing the human. I'm only recognizing the talent in the person and not the person himself. So I'm not a big fan of that.
Shayamal, I really want to drive the conversation towards adults now. I mean, specifically people who haven't played sport in my life. Like, I'm just like taking my example. Like, I was just a really fat kid. I was 155 kilos when I was young, and like it took me around 10 to 12 years to just get to what I am. And I've gone through a lot of ups and downs. I've been like working out for the last 12 years. But even then, I never played sport really because it was just like not in my mindset to play that much sport. Like if like today I'm 35, 36, sorry, I just turned 36 yesterday. So today I'm 36 years old, and I really want to sort of like, now that I'm, studying longevity or anti-aging, I really want to put some sport in my life. Like, what about adults like me who just want to start some sport for, keeping healthy and like sort of having fun in life? What would you suggest to people, like in terms of mindset and in terms of the choice of sport that they should be playing, that like you can get them through a good quality of life for them?
Okay. Well, firstly, happy belated birthday for yesterday. Wish you everything on the best. With respect to the sport, I think it all depends on what is a sport that piques your curiosity, piques your interest and your passion. It's very hard for me to say go and play this sport because the science is showing X, Y, Z. For example, the longevity studies point everyone towards tennis, saying tennis is the best sport for longevity. But I can't ask you to play tennis if you don't like it. You've never watched a game of tennis, don't like it, can't even see yourself doing it. So I'm a bigger proponent of Warren Buffett's compounding, which he borrowed from Albert Einstein's theory of compounding, which means that if you do something repeatedly every single day, even if it's for 5 minutes, you'll get all the benefit that you need. And so the question I'm going to ask is, what is the one thing you're most likely to repeat every single day for 10 minutes? And if you want to say it's badminton, squash, tennis, golf, or just doing push-ups or just walking your dog, I'm saying double down on that, because the law of compounding will yield all of the results around longevity that you're looking for. It's a completely different argument if you're looking at being the best in the world of something. Then we'll go through a whole different strength analysis. We look at biochemical, biomechanical, genetics, and we'll come up with our best probability of success. But from a longevity point of view, I would double down on the law of compounding and just repeat that, because you will get to where you want to if you repeat it for long enough. There's no two questions about it.
Right. That's a brilliant point, because because as someone who studies longevity for the longest time, I think it's very important for us to basically, like you said, double down on whatever we are doing and keep doing it for a longer period of time. And I have to ask you about your opinion on pickleball. I mean, it's become such a rage in India now. Like, there are people like my friends who are building courts because it's become an entrepreneurship model. What is your opinion on pickleball, to be honest?
Yeah, I mean, pickleball's like, I live in Spain, so paddle is the massive thing here. Pickleball's growing. I mean, I'm very, very excited that the sport is definitely growing. I traveled on the ATP tennis tour for a long time, so I'm still very much of a tennis fan as such. But I'm pro for any sport that's growing, because anything that engages people where they can play, I'm very, very excited, very, very happy with it. In Spain, we have a lot of paddle courts, so paddle has exploded in Europe and in Spain a lot. I think the modeling, the entrepreneurship modeling around the scoring systems, how it engages people is absolutely phenomenal. What's going to be the lifespan of these sports, I don't know. It will become very, very political. It will become about the interests of one sport over another. It will become who lobbies most to see whether they get played at a certain level. But the mere fact that it's out there and people are participating, it's great. I cannot comment on how long it will last and which direction it will head.
Right. Shamal, finally, like, you've reinvented yourself so many times in your career, like from different sports. Like, how do you continue to evolve? Like, what advice would you have for others looking to reinvent themselves time and again?
Yeah, I think you just got to be, your identity is your biggest strength, but also your biggest weakness and your hamstring. If you hold on to your identity, you will be like a tree stuck in the same place. And, identity, I was giving a talk and I was telling someone, identity are the likelihood of roots, roots in a tree. The only things that have roots are trees, because they're supposed to stay in one place. If you hold on to your identity, those roots grow down and they'll keep you in the same place. But we don't have roots. Roots don't come out of our feet, which means we're not supposed to be in the same place. We are supposed to move. We are supposed to evolve. We are supposed to change. So I tell people, I'll tell you an interesting story. The first locker room that I walked into was the Nashville Dolphins, and the coach was Phil Russell. And I walked into a team meeting after the team had lost 3 games in a row, and I started working with them. And every now and then the energy would pick up in that room, and someone would say, get angry and start blaming each other. And the coach would say, guys, remember rule number 6. And then the room got quiet. And then again, the energy would pick up and they'd say, hey, remember rule number 6. And the room got quiet. And I was very, very fascinated, but I did not know what rule 6 was. Anyway, the meeting ended. The next morning, I would go at 6 o'clock in the morning to Kingsmead. I'd walk around the stadium with the coach. We'd have a coffee, and I asked him, hey, coach, what's rule number 6? And he started laughing. And he said, rule number 6 is don't take yourself so seriously. Right. And asked him, that's brilliant. What are the other rules? And he says, there are no other rules. And rule number 6 became the foundation of everything that we built in our teams. So your question is, how do I keep evolving? It's because I don't take myself seriously at all. I take what I want, I do, I create, I have a passion, I have an idea, I put it out there. Someone likes it, they like it, they don't like it, they don't like it. I evolve, I take my passions, I am creatively curious with whatever I want to do. I'm writing different books. I've written fiction, I've written nonfiction, I've created art, I do things, I work with different sports, I speak in different environments, in places I have absolutely no business being in, I'm there. I remember a couple of years ago, I spoke in a conference at Design ID in Delhi with some of the biggest architects and these things. And one of the questions that someone asked at the end of my talk was, they said, how did you get a speaking slot here? You're a performance psychologist. You're surrounded by architects, by designers, by artists, by curators. And in the middle of this 120 speakers is one psychologist. How did you find? And I said, I really don't know how, but I'm eternally grateful that I'm here. So the question is, don't take yourself so seriously. Just explore curiously what comes to your mind. Give every idea the passion and energy that it deserves. Put it out in the world and let others be the judge. If you judge yourself before it gets out in the world, you sabotage 90% of what you have the potential to achieve.
Very well said. No, but don't take yourself seriously is what I'm going to take away from this podcast, Shamal. Thank you so much. You've been so wonderful. I was very excited to have this whole conversation with you because there's so many parents around me who are trying to make their children play sports, cricket, etc., etc. And I think this will serve as a very valuable template for all the young parents and also for a lot of athletes to maybe get some value add out of this. I think there are so many takeaways from the podcast. I mean, specifically, like mindset preparation, not taking yourself seriously, and so many others. Shamal, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm eternally grateful to you.
No, thank you so much, Anant, and I wish everyone everything of the best. I hope you benefit. And if anything resonates with you, you're more than welcome to write to me and let me know which one resonated. I'm always keen to see what people take away from these podcasts and what has an impact on them. But thank you so much for the opportunity. Eternally grateful.
Right. Thank you, Shayamal.
Okay.